Okay, imagine for a second that you have to design a computer, not with silicon chips and electricity, but in the age of steam with gears and levers. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that is the incredible story of Charles Babbage, a man whose ideas were so far ahead of his time, the world literally needed a century to catch up. Let's get into it.
And Babbage himself kind of knew he was onto something nobody else could see. He wrote this back in 1837, basically saying, "You all might not get it now, but just wait." It really sets the stage for just how visionary this guy was.
Now, you've probably heard him called the father of the computer. It's a huge title, right? But what does that actually mean? What drives a 19th century gentleman to dream up a machine that belongs in the 20th century?
Well, the answer starts with a really annoying problem. Back in Babbage's day, everything from navigating ships to building bridges ran on these massive books of mathematical tables. The problem was they were all calculated by hand, and they were filled with mistakes. And for a perfectionist mathematician like Babbage, this was just infuriating. He was convinced there had to be a better way.
But to understand his machines, you've really got to understand the man. And Babbage wasn't just some dusty inventor. He was a true polymath, a genius, with a personality just as complex and intricate as any of his designs.
I mean, just look at this list. The guy's mind was all over the place, in the best possible way. The cow catcher on the front of trains, that was him. An early eye exam tool, also him. He even proposed the idea of black box recorders for railways and did work in cryptography. The man's brain just did not stop.
And then there was the other side of his genius. He was famously, well, let's just say he was grumpy. He waged a lifelong one-man war against street musicians or organ grinders, claiming they were destroying intellectual progress. So yeah, a brilliant mind for sure, but a very human one too.
Okay, so back to the problem of those faulty math tables. How was this grumpy genius going to fix it? Well, his first big swing at the problem was a machine he called the difference engine.
And the goal here was just audacious. We're talking about a colossal steam-powered calculator that would not only compute the tables, but would also print them out perfectly, completely removing human error from the process. This was full-on automation, but back in the 1820s, it was totally unheard of. The math behind it was so clever. It used this method called finite differences, which basically let the machine solve incredibly complex problems by doing nothing more than simple, repeated addition. He turned rocket science math into a mechanical task that gears and levers could totally handle.
But the project was a spectacular failure. After a decade of work and an absolute fortune in government funding, the whole thing was scrapped. Why? Oh, the usual suspects. Personality clashes, endless funding arguments, and just the sheer difficulty of making something so precise with 19th century tools. Babbage's grand vision had completely stalled out.
But this is where the story gets really interesting, because that failure, it didn't stop him. In fact, it pushed him towards an idea that was even bigger, even more revolutionary, the analytical engine.
And this is the crucial leap right here. The difference engine was a one-trick pony, a calculator for one specific job. But the analytical engine, this could be programmed to do any job. This was the conceptual leap from a mere calculator to a true computer.
And when you look at his blueprints, it is just mind-blowing how familiar it all looks. He had a mill for doing the calculations, that's our CPU. He had a store to hold the numbers, that's our RAM. He used punch cards for instructions and a printer for output. He designed the basic architecture of a modern computer. In 1837, it's staggering.
The features he envisioned are the absolute bedrock of programming today. His designs had conditional branching, an if-then statement. It had loops to repeat instructions. In principle, his engine was Turing complete, which is just a fancy way of saying it could solve any computable problem, just like a modern computer. But a machine this revolutionary needed someone who could see its true potential. And that person wasn't Babbage, but his remarkable collaborator, Ada Lovelace. See, while Babbage was still focused on number crunching, Ada Lovelace saw something much bigger. She realized its power wasn't just about math. She used this beautiful poetic analogy, saying that if the machine could manipulate numbers, which are just symbols, it could manipulate any symbols, like musical notes or letters. She basically foresaw a future where computers could create art and music, a vision that was wildly ahead of its time.
And she didn't just talk about it, she put her ideas into practice. She wrote a detailed set of instructions for the analytical engine to calculate a complex sequence of numbers, and that document is now recognized as the world's very first computer program, making her the world's first programmer.
So, Babbage died in 1871. His engines were never built, and his vision was pretty much dismissed as a fantasy. For decades, he was seen as a brilliant failure. But the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot.
Okay, fast forward over a century, all the way to 1991. The Science Museum in London decides to try and build his difference engine number 2 using only his original plans. And the question was, after all that time, would it actually work? Well, they built it, and it did. It worked perfectly.
And I mean perfectly. The finished machine is a 5-ton marvel of brass and iron, with 8,000 parts, and it returns results that are accurate to 31 digits. It was proof. Babbage's designs weren't flawed, he was just limited by the technology and the politics of his time. And that's really why this all matters. The device you're watching this on right now, your phone, your computer, it operates on the very same principles Babbage laid out in the 1830s. A processor, a memory, and a set of instructions. He didn't build the future, but he absolutely drew the blueprints.
Which leaves you with one final thought. Babbage died thinking his life's work was a failure. But his ideas were just waiting for the world to catch up. So it makes you wonder, which of the ambitious projects that failed today are just waiting for their own moment of vindication a century from now?